Madam Chair, I want to first note that I got the text of this legislation about an hour and a half ago, so we were scrambling to try to get some amendments put together. We were able to get eight different amendments submitted, and I want to run through those very quickly. I'm just trying to find my eighth one because I hadn't seen how the text came out yet. Madam Chair, the first one, we joined a letter with about 40 members of Congress, bipartisan members, related to risk rating 2.0, which is a new methodology that FEMA is going to be using to calculate flood insurance rates. We've had 4 different conference calls with FEMA talking through how these changes will affect states. Congressman Pasquale and I are very concerned, and again led this bipartisan letter that would delay or put a moratorium on implementation of risk rating 2.0. Just to give you an example, there are homes in our congressional district that just got pounded by Hurricane Ida that would have a 10-fold increase in their flood insurance premiums. There's a house in Lafourche Parish that goes from $572 a year to over $5,500 a year beginning on October 1st. This methodology divorces itself from the way that the maps are designed, the flood risk maps. It is a black box voodoo math that is very difficult, despite 4 different conference calls, to understand. FEMA promised us there would be no examples of these exponential increases, yet it's exactly what happened. We found other homes in St. Charles Parish and other homes in Lafourche Parish that have the same type of exorbitant increases in flood insurance rates. So based on the letter, I would consider this to be a bipartisan request that simply establishes a 1-year moratorium on the implementation of risk rating 2.0. It does require that a number of studies be done in order to provide information to the Congress so we can better understand the methodology on how these rates are going to be calculated. Secondly, Madam Chair, I noted in here yesterday when I came and testified, the Community Development Block Grant Disaster Recovery Program. Look, I want to be clear. I'll say it again. I appreciate President Biden asking for emergency relief for the 2020 hurricanes and especially for the 2021 Hurricane Ida, as quickly as he did. Last year was a year late. This one, I really appreciate him going down there and asking for these funds as soon as he did. The Community Development Block Grant Disaster Recovery Program is a disaster itself. Madam Chair, I've been through this many times. I've seen it try and implement it in North Carolina, Texas, and other states. It's not exclusive to Louisiana. Just to give you a quick stat, we provided $1.7 billion in community development block grant funds for the state of Louisiana from a 2016 1,000-year flood. Here we are 5 years later, less than $700 million of that has actually been offered to flood victims. This isn't exclusive to Louisiana. It's not limited to Louisiana. The program, the agency is incapable of responding with urgency. This has a greater impact to those in greater need. It is our own federal government re-victimizing flood victims. Money in the bank, people living in gutted homes, and no ability to connect the dots. While all this is going on, this slow process is going on, the program managers have made hundreds of millions of dollars. So people are getting paid, but it's the program managers, not the actual hurricane victims, flood victims, disaster victims. Let me say it again. This isn't exclusive to Louisiana. This happens every time this program is implemented. They're incapable of executing this program efficiently. Madam Chair, we have an amendment that would take $2.5 billion of the $5 billion, and it would implement it through the Economic Development Administration and Department of Commerce that is proven, according to GAO and other analysis, proven to be able to execute these programs much faster, get the dollars out the door. That's our only objective here. I ask that you consider that amendment that would divert some of the money to Economic Development Administration. I think it would be a great opportunity for us to be able to compare the execution to both programs. Let's see how HUD does compared to EDA, and let's, moving forward then, go ahead and stick with the winner. Madam Chair, we have 2 amendments that pertain to something called duplication of benefits. This is a law where Congressman Cedric Richmond and I had introduced legislation that's law today that says that if you get a loan from the Small Business Administration, you are not excluded or prohibited from getting a grant under the HUD program. We changed the law, yet HUD, and I'll beat up on Secretary Carson, who I think did a very flawed implementation of that program. We still have thousands of families that have been deemed ineligible, despite the fact that the law has been changed. We have 2 amendments to prevent that from being a problem moving forward. We have an amendment on economic injury disaster loan, which is a small business loan program for businesses. You're all familiar with the PPP loan program. I think that the Small Business Administration and Department of Treasury did a remarkable remarkable job getting that program executed, getting money out the door in a brief period of time. Yes, there were imperfections, but when you compare it to the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program that's being administered internally by the previous administration and this one, it is a disaster. They're unable to get the dollars out the door, and there's a specific program related to Form 4506C where the IRS has to provide a form verifying income. The IRS is taking forever to get these forms out, therefore delaying the ability of people to get access to loans. We have an amendment related to the Natural Resources Conservation Service. Right now, the bill has $275 million in it for NRCS to be able to carry out their emergency watershed program. What this does is this is similar to a provision that was implemented a few years ago. It provides NRCS some authority to remove debris and sediment from private property when that is actually impeding the watershed's ability to flow. And then lastly, Madam Chair, or Mr. Chair, both of you, all of you, we have an amendment that would provide funds for fisheries disaster declaration. We've had extraordinary impacts with Hurricanes Laura, Delta, Zeta, and then more recently Hurricane Ida were the top commercial seafood in the continental United States, and this would ensure that funds are available to those folks from the 2021 disasters, because there's some lack of clarity in the text of the bill based on the hour-and-a-half review we've had. So with that, Madam Chair, I'm under no illusion of what you guys are going to do with these, but I do think that it's really important to raise these issues, and I want to re-emphasize the risk rating 2.0 is going to have a profound impact on some of these communities that just got hit, trying to rebuild right now, and if they're going to get the double whammy of a tenfold increase in flood insurance premiums, you all know good and well that when you have your check for your mortgage every week, that's the money that you can pay, and if all of a sudden you're going to have a significant increase in charge for flood insurance, it's going to make it simply unaffordable for these people to live in these communities. With that, I'm happy to take any questions and yield back.
Thank you very much. We always welcome here, and we appreciate your testimony. Mr. Cole.
No questions, Mr. Chairman.
No questions. Dr. Burgess? Mr. Promoter?
Yeah, I just have a comment. Mr. Graves, I do appreciate you coming here and testifying, and you know, obviously Louisiana's been getting clobbered again and again and again and again. Colorado, we're fighting wildfires again and again and again and again. And, you know, we've had this conversation today about forward thinking and, you know, dealing with debt, the debt ceiling and all that. So, I mean, part of what we're trying to accomplish, that Ed Perlmutter is trying to accomplish with some of the infrastructure bills, the components of that, as well as the Build Back Better, is that we get ahead of some of this, you know, disasters that we've been facing, these heavy weather events. So, I mean, and I don't know where you would go with this question, but I'm going to ask you anyway. I mean, coming here to the rules and talking about disaster after disaster after disaster, what is Louisiana going to do to protect itself going forward instead of always asking for disaster money for the hurricane that hit yesterday?
Sure. It's a great question. So first of all, Mr. Chairman, 2 jobs back before I came here, started a new coastal agency in the state of Louisiana. We were able to execute about $24 billion in resiliency projects. The reason that I'm not sitting here talking to you about the devastation in New Orleans is because we invested about $15 billion in a hurricane protection system there that saved that community. I'd be asking you for tens of billions of dollars and talking to you about the thousands of lives that were lost had that investment not been made. I remind you, Hurricane Katrina, we lost 1,600 of our neighbors, friends, and family members in the New Orleans area from that hurricane. We have made that $26 billion program includes give me some wiggle room, but I'm gonna guess somewhere around $8 to $10 billion in ecological restoration. So that's the restoration of our coastal wetlands, helping to provide that buffer from storm surge. 2 other things. Number one, Mr. Promoter, in 2018, bipartisan legislation, the Disaster Reform Recovery Act, DARA, signed into law in October of 18, that legislation, in my opinion, is the first time that we began this shift from entirely reactive federal position and policy to beginning to be more proactive, and looking at ways to make proactive investments and starting the program like the BRIC program, where we can be more proactive, have dedicated funding to preventing disasters, to mitigating hazards. And then I remind you that the greatest investment in resiliency in this Congress's history was actually done in February of 2018, where we made record investments in resiliency. And that was done on a bipartisan basis as the Disaster Recovery Reform Act. So the state of Louisiana has made unprecedented investment. I'd put our coastal agency up against any other in the United States and one of the top ones in the world, including investments in science. I think that in the past few years, we've done some pretty remarkable things here, beginning to shift from this reactive, overly cost-prohibitive approach to being more proactive. Study after study shows you get cost savings for making those proactive investments. And I think that in Congress, we're beginning to shift from reactive to proactive as well.
Well, I thank you, and I appreciate your expertise on this subject. I yield back.